So, thank you for joining me. I am Shanique Bird with Toxin Magazine. I am joined with Michaela. Now, Michaela, tell me a little about who you are and why you're here.
Well, I am, first of all, I'm a Black woman working in corporate America. And I am here to basically share my story, to be the voice of those who aren't able to or aren't willing to speak up against some of the discrimination that they are dealing with within the in the work field.
So, tell me the first time you felt you were being discriminated against in corporate America.
Oh, that goes way back before I was even 20 years old. I received a job doing file as a file clerk. And I started to notice like the manager would kind of like single out certain individuals. And I started to see a pattern of those individuals that she seemed to single out. So that was one of my first experiences within the work, place. But it actually started way back in high school when I went to apply for a job one time. Me and my best friend that was white at the time, we both went to go apply for a job. We were told face to face that the position was filled. However, they called her back. And so, yeah, that was like one of that first times where I was like, oh crap. And I had a previous experience. She didn't, so it was kind of like, it really made me sit back and wonder. And I even remember, my friend at the time calling me and asking me, can I accept this job? Is that okay? Because I can't believe she said that. And, at the time I was like, no offense to my friend, but I knew the type of person that she was, and I knew she wasn't going to stay there long. So I was like, oh, okay, that's cool. Go ahead, take it.
Wow. So,
Yeah.
what is happening to you right now?
Okay. Currently, I have been at my job for the past 20 years. And first of all, it's a really small company. So there's not much room for advancement. And I knew that going in. However, my thought process was, you know what? I'm going to learn as much as I can. I'm going to get these skills underneath my belt. So then, when it is time for the president of the company to step down, I will be next in line. That's my thought process. However, after 20 years, that did not happen. Did not happen at all.
Mm.
Yeah. So, of course, people on the outside was asking me, so are you the next person in line? Because they knew that he was close to retirement age. And, I kind of joked with them and I'm like, yeah, that would be great if but then as it became closer and the opportunity presented myself, I actually did apply for the position. And I was told that they were wanting someone with more experience. And for me, that was like a slap in the face because it was like, I've been here for 20 years. Not only do I have the experience, I have the relationships with the clients. I know the ins and outs of the job. And let's just be honest, I basically ran the company, so to say, only because the manager, quote unquote, he was not involved in the daily tasks of the company. So for that to be said, okay, I'm not qualified. And then to top it off, no interview. So it was
So they
like,
just told you you weren't qualified, although you've been there for 20 years. What did they say the qualifications were?
well, I don't have the job posting in front of me. However, it was generic as far as having a designation, which I do hold, um, having management experience. And that part kind of was like, okay, although I don't hold the manager title, I do a lot of managerial duties. So when it was told to me, I basically said, okay, well, I hope you don't expect for me to train this new guy because it is not happening.
Right.
And I have held my foot to the fire and I have not done it. So
So, are you still working at the same place?
currently, yes, I am. Now, for how much longer, that's the question.
Yeah, that was the next question. So, if you feel that you're being discriminated against,
hmm
is it smart to stay in that situation or should you move on? But you've given this job 20 years. It's
Right,
not that easy to move on. What do
right,
you say to people who would probably say, you're complaining, find another job. Why should we hire you?
right,
What do
right.
you say to those people?
You know, I have really been struggling with that internally myself because all of the beliefs that I've held in my mind about how you work up that corporate ladder was basically just wiped away. It was like, nope, you was wrong. So for me personally, I have been looking at the situation as what is the lesson that I need to learn from this? Instead of pointing the finger at everything that I feel like they have done wrong, I try to focus on the positives. Now, some days it's easier than others, but that is my goal, is to basically learn from those experiences, try to figure out how I could use that on my next venture and go from there. So I am actively seeking. If they're not aware of that, they should be aware of that. I'm very verbal. I do speak my mind, so they do know that I am very unhappy in the situation that I'm in. So I believe that I have given them the opportunity to right their wrong, and so far they haven't.
But why do you think you deserve to be promoted?
I deserve it because I have done the work. Let's just say that. I have done the work. Year after year, we have these reviews and everyone says great, wonderful things about me, not trying to toot my own horn, but beep, beep. You know what I mean? Know your worth. So
Right.
I do know that I'm very valuable. I do know that I know a lot. And not only do I know a lot, I also know the areas of where improvement is needed because I can see the big picture. So I'm not taking it personal, which is so hard. However, as a spiritual warrior, that is one of the things that we teach and we live by, is not to take things personal. So some days, like I said, are easier than others. I have made a plan, and I am following that plan to leave that company. So my vision is focused on that instead of focusing on what didn't happen, what I don't like, how they did me wrong. I am focusing on me and how I can learn from this and move forward.
Now, what advice would you give other Black women who may be in the same situation as you?
What I would give, the advice that I would give for them, number one is to set your boundaries, personal, business boundaries, all of that. I believe that it's very important. I also believe that you should be very impeccable with your word. Tell them how you feel. Do not fear that if you are open and honest with your employer, that, you know, they may can you, which, I mean, granted, that could happen. However, I do believe when you are standing in your truth and setting your boundaries and you are not wavering for anyone, it will be rewarded to you.
Okay. Now, Barb, I see you jumped on. Hi, Barb.
I'm trying to deal with Halloween. So
I know, you know what? And I think that's why a lot of people I had some
right.
people cancel because of Halloween. I started not to, but I'm like, well, I don't, not celebrating Halloween.
Right. Well, I put you on mute occasionally when the kids come to the door, but the little ones have already come. Michaela, I don't know you at all, but I think the reason you didn't get the job is because you're too powerful.
Ooh.
And too knowledgeable.
I love that.
Because I think what happens is a lot of these people get scared if you're going to be even more knowledgeable than whoever the powers that be are. So you have to find a job that appreciates that.
You are so right. I appreciate that. Thank you.
And I think for women, any of us that push the envelope. Mm-hmm. I worked in a whole different field in mental health and juvenile justice with kids. And when I push that envelope, they push me out. So, it's a fine line, but I think we have to keep pushing because some of their policies in these agencies or any of these corporations, they want the status quo. They don't want to shake the boat, even if it's in their best interest.
You're right.
Now, how hard is it to be a woman right now? We know women had issues for centuries. We know we've always had issues, but now, do you think that is it getting better? The Me Too movement and all this great stuff. Do we feel empowered, or the three women that's here?
I think we're empowered, but I think we scare the shit out of them.
I agree.
Because that means they're going to lose some of their
control.
Clout. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I think our ideas, because I think we're more global than they are. I think we worry about our kids, our elderly parents, our relatives, our community, our schools. I don't know how many men think about all of that and their job. We think about that as part of whatever job we have.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Healthcare.
Right. So what do we do? Like, how do we do? I know we just keep moving forward. Does anyone have any ideas of what women should do to kind of, like you said, push forward? I think we're going in the right direction. We're making more noise now. People have to pay attention now. It's not so easy to ignore what women are saying, and a lot of men are being held accountable. What are your thoughts on that?
I was going to ask Michaela, are there other women in your workforce wherever you work? Are there women that will join together? And because I'm sure it has to do with more than just you.
Well, she is not in Rochester.
Oh, she's not?
No. So tell her a little about who you are, Michaela.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I'm an insurance underwriter. I actually live in Omaha, Nebraska.
Oh, wow.
Yes. However, I work across the state line in Iowa.
Oh,
yes.
From Nebraska to Iowa. Wow.
Yes. So there are other women in the work field and in our company. However, it's a very small company, less than 10 employees.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So we don't have that middleman. We do not have like a human resource department. We don't have those other avenues. So unfortunately, it's being ran like a dictatorship. Whatever he says goes, and we can either agree or disagree, and we would have to, pay the price. So I basically just put my foot down and I just said, no, I'm no longer going to accept that anymore. And that's what I've been doing. I set my boundary, I put my foot down, and I'm not wavering. So if that means they kick me out, then it wasn't meant to be. They kicked me out.
Right.
Well, what are the options though in Nebraska and Iowa? For us Easterners, we have no idea what goes on in these other states.
I know, right? Everything that I've read, it's always went back to, your human resource department. Well, I don't know what that option is if you don't have one. So I've always been fearful to speak up on certain instances. And I've always felt like my job was at jeopardy because I was verbal. I mean, I would always go there, but I wouldn't cross the line. But I do believe this year I crossed that line. But I felt the need to cross that line. And I wanted them to know how I felt, and I wanted them to know, how deeply it damaged me. And this right here, speaking about it, is part of my healing process. So yeah. So that's what
Michaela came to me. Her mom is she writes for Toxin Magazine, kind of. She has this group. She takes care of the group on Facebook. She is wonderful. She's been pushing stuff. So she was like, my daughter's having this issue. You need to talk to her. So I'm like, okay, tell her to come on.
And I took it. I saw the door open. I said, you know what? This is it. This is my chance to, speak my voice, let it be known. I'm no longer afraid.
Right. And that's what it has to happen at this point.
Yes. Have you always lived in Nebraska or Iowa?
Yes. Born and
raised. Would you ever think of moving?
Definitely.
Definitely. Now, what is I would have no idea what's out there, but it's got to be better than some of this. Or at least you'd have a more cohorts that would support each other in either a bigger place or a different kind of place, or a women's drug organization. There's no guarantees. Some of these people do not know how to be administrators. They just know how to be dictators.
True. Now, what is the demographic there? What is the percentage of Black people in the area you are in, both where you live and where you work?
I don't know the actual numbers per se. Let's just say that there are less minorities in Council Bluffs than it is in Omaha.
Oh.
Yeah.
And what other types have you had to deal with other types of discrimination outside of the workplace?
I mean, yeah, when you go shopping and all that kind of stuff, that stuff is normal. And I hate to normalize it, but when you've lived that your whole entire life, let's just be honest, it becomes normal. You know what I mean?
Really? Okay.
It really does, regardless if it's, what you feel like is right or wrong. I like to prove people wrong. That's just me personally. So when someone has this, quote unquote stereotype about someone, or, I just like to break that mold. So then, they can look back and be like, okay, well, it's not all. I could say some, so.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So Barb, talk about your social work. I know we talked about this before about, some of the issues you ran into. I know you said something a little bit about it.
Well, the thing is, I grew up in New York City and I went to college in New York, and I worked in the Bronx, South Bronx. I worked for DSS. I worked for mental health clinics. No matter where you worked, I expected more from mental health people. They're just as crazy as everybody else. And given that power to be an administrator, no matter where the hell it is, a hospital, a psych center, they are lunatics. The doctors included, the nurses included. Something about that power thing, when they get to the top and they're totally not qualified because maybe they were good as a psychologist, but they're not good as an administrator, it all falls apart. And being on a hierarchy as a social worker, kind of you're low down on the totem pole, even though you have a master's and even though you do therapy just like everybody else, the psychologist, the psychiatrist, whatever, you kind of have to bow down to them. And when we don't want to do it, is exactly what you said. When we didn't want to do it, we have our own license, our own credentials, and our own values, they would be pissed. And they would make our lives miserable. The only difference was once I worked for the state of New York, that didn't get better, but I had HR and I had lawyers from the union. That was the only advantage. And the bottom line was my own values. It's like I just wouldn't let them be co-opted. So in my case, they fired me from one of the facilities because I wouldn't listen. But I don't work for the facility. I work for the state of New York Mental Health. But the director of the facility called the director of the psych center to put me on probation. So it doesn't make any difference, as far as I'm concerned, where you work. When you stand up for your clients, your values, nobody likes it. And when I look back now, because I've been retired maybe 10 years, I'm like, how did I survive these idiots? Because they were idiots. I was going to say something else. I have to watch my mouth. It's unbelievable how they can make things that they think are important. I mean, kids was suicidal, and I had to make a decision to send them to a hospital, and they would have the nerve to tell me I was wrong. This was even backed up by a psychiatrist, backed up. You know, we're not going to take a chance with these people's lives. And yet somehow their power and control would take over and say, well, the kids are manipulating you. Okay, so where did you get your degree from? You're an administrator. That's where they got their degree from. That's it. So it's an uphill battle, I think. And some of the men had problems, I think, too. But most of the time it was women, because I always got the impression, like, how dare us tell them what to do? Even if it was an administrator and a principal of a school who was a woman and still believed that certain mindset, it's like, how dare you tell us that we don't know what we're doing?
Hey, how you doing, Shanique? Yes, it is me, Maria.
So we're talking about feeling, Michaela was discriminated at work. Tell us about a time where you felt that you weren't valued at work or in a situation. Tell us about, you're pretty dark. I don't know if you're sitting in a dark room.
Oh, I'm sorry. I don't have my light. Hold on. I'm listening.
So we're just trying to determine, we're just talking about stories, things where you felt maybe unappreciated, discriminated against as a Black man. We've talked from women's aspect, but how is it being a Black man in America today?
Oh,
that's a loaded question. I know
it's quite loaded. But for me anyway, not speaking for all Black males. For me, it's a struggle every single day. But the way I go about my day, I kind of just already know that I'm Black and I can't change that, right? So when I walk out these doors, I already feel like there's a target wherever it is that I go. But I always try to make myself available to everybody and make sure that whatever it is that I'm doing, or especially as it relates to going out here in this thoroughly racist society, that I'm always conscious and aware of that.
So can you tell us about an incident where it just had you like feeling some type of way, or feeling like, will this ever get better?
Oh gosh. Where will we start? From childhood on up to adulthood, right? So, I mean, there's many examples that I can give. But for instance, like the public education system, one of the things that I've recognized or learned as an adult is that I literally went K through 12 without even being educated by one Black teacher. And that was pretty telling to me. My mentor and I, we discussed this a lot. So that was one of the things that was pretty telling for me, that I've learned as an adult, and how that may have shaped and framed my views and the way I go about being a Black male in this society right here. So there's many examples that I can give, but all of my examples is not everybody else's examples, right? So when we get caught up on, these examples in our lives and how it affected us, that kind of, those are anecdotal things that we really don't want to debate about. What we want to get into is make sure that as Black men, we recognize our worth, our struggle, but there's a level of understanding that we must have to really organize ourselves to change the narrative on who the Black male really is.
So how do we do that? I know we're putting a lot of pressure. You're the only man here right now, so you're representing for them.
Well, it can be a complicated thing, right? Because most men, manly men, everybody feels like an alpha dog individually, right? Everybody feels like they're the top. But at some point as men, we have to understand that collective leadership is better than individual leadership. And sometimes, with us, we kind of feel like as individuals, if we're not in the lead on any certain issue, then we can't move forward, right? But every one of us put together doesn't know everything about everything, right? So when we put our minds collectively together, we still wouldn't know everything about everything, but we know much more as a collective group. We would really know much more as a collective group than an individual group. So I believe, for me, myself, we just got to find that that balance with Black men to say, if we work together as a collective, we can get more done than we can as individuals.
And one thing that's happening here in Rochester, Michaela, I don't know if, do you belong to any organizations? Like, do you any organizations like maybe, I don't know, what do we have here? We have a whole bunch of different organizations for schools and, like criminal justice reform. Do you know if that's happening in your city?
I know that there is a lot of things going on in our community. However, I am not involved in any of those. That is my goal, is to become more involved. Now that, my kids are older and I have more time, that is definitely something that I want to pursue.
So we have a lot of silos here in Rochester, and that's a big issue. And there's always talk about, I can't work with this person, I can't work with that person. Nobody's trying to work with the other person. Barb, you've been in, although you're a white woman, right? You participated in a lot of groups. Tell us some issues that you've had. You've had some issues with some of the organizations, haven't you?
Well, it depends on what it is. I mean, depends who's running it. And it depends on their power control issues. And sometimes it's the head of the organization doesn't have the same perspective as the members. And the question is, how do you get that compatible? Or there are things that I would join, but certain people who run it like your boss. It's, unless you join this organization, think the way we think, but it's a bigger picture.
That's what I'm learning too about these organizations. When you volunteer, I think sometimes people forget that you're a volunteer. You're not getting paid for this work, right? So how do we, Mario, I don't know if you want to jump in. How do we work together? Like, that is the big issue. I don't know if you had a chance, Mario, to look at Craig Carson, that goes by Diablo Payne on Facebook. He did a interview with Mikey Johnson that was here. And they talked a lot about not being able to deal or work with different organizations. They talked, well, not a lot, but they talked enough to talk about, this person doesn't want to work with this person doesn't want to work with that person. Mm. What ideas do you, I mean, I know you're vocal on a lot of things with Take It Down. What ideas would you have to people who say, well, I can't work with this person, or I can't work with that person, or I can't work with Mario because
Yeah, I know what you mean. And so for me, Shanique, for me, honestly, I must say that, again, it goes back to these egos, that there's just one person's way of doing very complicated jobs, or at least trying to resolve some very complicated and complex issues that we have in our community. So I think for many others that may say they can't work with anyone, I would ask, what are you willing to work on? What are you willing to work on? And I don't think it's about working with the person. What are you willing to commit to that you can work on? Because the person that you're working with, if they're trying to work with you on something, then what are you trying to work on? Because worrying about whether or not you could work with this person just, I think it lends itself to an excuse not to get things done and not to try to resolve problems, right? So if we continue to feed into that type of atmosphere that you can't work with anybody, then work will never get done. Because again, this complicated work cannot be done alone. It can't be done with one organization. It can't be done with any one individual. And in Rochester, and especially for the generation that I come from, there's still this look at me, it's all about me. And if you're not in with the cool kids, then you're out, right? Whatever that is, whatever the cool kids table looks like. But these people just want to make excuses about not working together because these some very complicated issues that collectively, that's the only way you're gonna solve problems. You gotta have human capital if you don't have financial capital. And everybody's looking for the financial capital for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And trying to take credit, to resolve issues that are unresolved and thinking that you can do it alone and hide behind the excuse about you can't work with others. And oftentimes you'll find that many of those people that say that haven't even attempted to work with the people or organizations that they claim that they can't work with. Because everybody's trying to solve some of the same problems that we have in Rochester. And the main three, everybody jumps to, but then when something else happens, they jump to another thing. So if you look at those people that are constantly fluid and in motion with their direction, those are the people that you probably don't even want to work with anyway, because those are the people that are most likely saying that they can't work with this one and that one. But oftentimes you'll find them jumping from one table to the next. And why? Why? Because you really don't want to work on one thing together, because it's much easier to say that you can't work with a person than actually get the work done.
Right. And it's happening across the country. You know, Michaela's in Nebraska. She's going through her racial issues with her employment. So discrimination, we know, is across the country, right? That's why it's imperative for people, like even gathering in Rochester, it could impact people gathering across the country, because we build a team here, we can build a team in Nebraska, we can build a team, and then now people won't be so easily able to get away with discrimination, right? They'll be held accountable, like people are doing with the Me Too movement. Men are being held accountable. I don't know if it's right or wrong, but
the thing is, if we can't establish ourselves locally, we'll never be able to establish ourselves nationally. So we need to establish ourselves locally and organize, get a critical mass of people working together cooperatively, collaboratively, consistently. And we have to be committed to what it is that we want to do and work on. Everybody keeps talking about who they don't want to work with, but again, I ask, who are you working with and what are you willing to work on?
Do you also think it's intergenerational? Because it seems like Me Too, Black Lives Matters are young people. And the other people are part of the establishment forever. And they're very well known in Rochester, very well connected, but they have ideas that are not movable. So I'm not sure how did those two get together to try to bring about change, or maybe not. Maybe they're two parallel tracks.
Well, just from my own perspective, the Black Lives Matter movement here for me seems to have been hijacked. It seems to have been hijacked to the point where the status quo is just going to be that, right? We see a small number of people, they get paid, they get the money, and then they go away. Right. So when you have a mindset already that is going to have people selling out, status quo is going to win every time.
Yeah, I think that's a good point.
Yeah, I wanted you to be more specific about what do you mean? I mean, when you said they're selling out, who, what, when, where?
Well, the Black leadership of Rochester, will sell out to anybody around here. In terms of what our conditions were 50 years ago to what they look like now, We are in worse shape with Black leadership right now all around us. Okay. And so when we start taking a look at that, the white liberal structure in the Black community is no different from the conservative community. Okay, so Black leadership around here in Rochester has turned a blind eye, and it's across the board. It's across the board. You can look at it in the school systems around here, the Rochester City School District. You could look at it in City Council. Okay, we have many people in positions of Black leadership that are saying nothing to the conditions that are going on around here in Rochester, New York. And just as we wouldn't take it from white leadership, we shouldn't take it from Black leadership, because these conditions that we are facing are appalling. We must acknowledge that. And we must understand that whoever is in that seat, whether it be Black, brown, yellow, or whatever other color people come in, we must understand that we must organize ourselves anyway. That's what we as Black people must do anyway. Otherwise, it'll just be status quo, and we'll just keep talking, and round we go. We have all kinds of resources, especially financial resources. The infusion of money that's in Rochester, New York, and Monroe County. I mean, there's an infusion of resources that if we don't organize ourselves, those financial resources will be squandered away.
Yeah. Anything to add to that, Barb?
No, I don't know. I'm so overwhelmed by it all. I just don't know how to separate the forest from the trees. I have substituted in the Rochester City School District, but the suburban schools, as well as the city schools, are just inadequate. They just don't know what they don't know, and they don't seem to want to change for the better. And I keep asking all of our school districts, so what are you doing with the stimulus package? What are you putting your money into? Why aren't we putting money into kids with dyslexia, learning disabilities, hiring more special ed teachers? I don't get any answers. I'm just totally frustrated by the whole thing. And then I see, if I want to join some of these committees, you can only join with a certain mindset. If you think outside the box, then they don't want you on the committee, like the job thing too. They don't want you to think outside the box.
Yeah. Michaela, you want to jump in and say anything?
I agree with everything. My mentality is that, you can't use the same mindset to solve an issue with the mindset that created the issue. So you have to think outside the box. That's the only way. But unfortunately, we have these higher ups that are unwilling to bend. They're unwilling to see the bigger picture. And instead, it's all about me, and not about we or us. Everything is so individualized. Everybody wants to know, well, what's in it for me? Well, how about standing up for what's right? What happened to that? Like, what happened to treating each other the way we want to be treated? Like, it's crazy how things are. Like, I don't even watch the news anymore. Because it's just all the way to the left, and it's like it's everywhere. It's everything, unfortunately. So yeah, we do need to jump, think outside the box to create more solutions, and we need more people that are willing to rattle that is willing to say, okay, yeah, it's time. And that goes down to the policies that are in force and the laws that are in place. We have to start all the way there. And unfortunately, just changing someone's mindset, that is a start, but that's just the tip of the iceberg. Because when you have policies in place and laws that are, going with their agenda, whatever that may be, it's kind of like we're fighting a a never-ending battle, unfortunately. So yeah,
Yeah.
they're definitely afraid of the outside of the box.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that's why it's imperative for Black people to figure out a way. So, Michaela, you have to get in touch with whoever is doing the criminal justice reform and all that great stuff in your area. So, I always believe if you're not a part of the solution, you're part of the problem. So, we have to figure out a way that we can change the system. And again, I do agree. I believe it starts with laws. I believe in changing, who we vote for and make sure that we vote with information. We don't just vote blindly.
Oh yeah,
So,
do your research. Don't
mhm.
don't just go by whatever someone says. And I believe that that's very important too, because some of us are so quick to just say, oh yeah, such and such said this, and since this person is on this so-called pedestal, you believe whatever they say or whatever. But no, go research that yourself. Go find out the information because it's out there. Do the
Right,
work. Do the work.
right. November 2nd is coming. Are they voting in your area, right? November 2nd? Yeah.
Hmm.
Mario, what are you thinking about voting? Are you voting November 2nd?
Yes, I'll probably go to the polls and cast my ballot. um, but I was just sitting here as you were discussing about not watching the news and how things have gone crazy. But these things that are happening today have always been there. They've always been there. And I think that because we have so much more information and there's so many images and there's so many ways that we can get, information, especially today, it seems to be amplified, right? Um, Everything gets amplified and magnified to the point where we start to believe that how could this now be happening? But these things have always been happening since all of us on this call have been young. We've witnessed the racism, and we still witness the racism today. The beast and illness, the individual, institutional, and structural racism that we experience on a daily basis,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I think Barb had brought up the suburban school districts are in dire straits. Not her words, but something similar to that. And she's absolutely right. These suburban school districts are going bananas over everything. They're arguing and fussing about critical race theory, which isn't even in their school districts, just to avoid talking about racism because they don't like the subject matter. They just about every suburban school district in the surrounding Rochester area has been in the news for one reason or another, high profile for racism. It's about 4 or 5, maybe even 6 school districts that I could think of right now has been in the news for their racism and their towns and their schools and their homes and every institution that is around them. And they don't want to address it. They don't want to talk about it. And so there's that. And that's been happening since the beginning of the public educational school system. So we know that. Okay. And then we see all of these Black lives still being shot down in the streets, whether by police or our own. So these things have been there since I've been a young boy. All of these issues that they're talking about right now, that we are all talking about right now, whether we're talking about the public education system, policing, criminal justice system, all of the violence, all of the corruption that's going on with politicians, housing, human service, you name it, every area of life. This is the same thing since I've been a young boy. When Raleigh Kenton was shot and killed around the same time that I was a teenager at 14, 15 years old. And I remember us as teenagers talking about it in high school, somewhere around 9th, 10th grade. And we were all in awe thinking like, wow, that could be one of us. That could be one of us. And that was way back in the early 90s, somewhere around 91, 92. And that was the next year later. I think we had the highest number of homicides that we've seen in Rochester, which was around 70. Which now 30 years later, we're still at around 70. 30 years later. So these issues that we talk are not new. Everybody feels like they're brand new because some people think they've arrived to the issues and now they got all the world's problems solved because they're just getting their bearings and they're looking at issues and want to throw one broad stroke at them as if it's some kind of panacea that we can just fix things with one solution. And it's not. And it's never going to go away. And for the Black community in particular, we must organize around anything. That's been our biggest problem. The fundamental problem in the Black community is we haven't been able to organize ourselves. And nothing will change because these people know over and over again that when you have a bunch of unorganized people, you can do whatever it is that they want because nobody is even going to stand up and say anything about it. These issues are not new. The public education system, Rochester City School District is in the news again, and they've been in the news for my whole life. These issues are not new. Teachers claiming that they're being assaulted or alleging that they're being assaulted, students being assaulted, poor neighborhoods, violence, in and out of schools, all of this stuff. These issues are not new. We act and try to make these issues a brand new subject matter around here in Rochester, but they're not new. And the same players that have been here since I've been young still are the talking heads about how to solve these problems. And we know it. Many of these same people, since I was a young person, that run these organizations, that have been politicians, they're still talking about how to solve these problems. And these people were mayors, councilmen, they were superintendent, all of this stuff. And they are still trying to tell us here in 2021, 2 months going into 2022, on how to solve problems.
Howard, what we're talking about is people saying that they can't work with this person, can't work with that person, all the stuff going on in Rochester. What are your thoughts about when people act as if they can't work with someone? I'm not sure if you saw Craig's interview with Mikey on Facebook, but they talked a little about that, about having a hard time working with certain people. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I didn't want to, good evening, everyone. I didn't want to cut Mario off. I don't know if he was finished with his thoughts, but I'd be glad to share my thoughts as well. But I don't know if he was done. Were you trying to say more, Brother Mario?
I lost my last thought. Go ahead, take that.
Okay. So I absolutely agree with what I heard you saying when I came on in terms of none of this being new. All of these issues they're as old as I am, and I'm the oldest person here. I think I am. I want to, full disclosure, I'm one of those people in this community who many folks would tell you I'm hard to work with. I don't know how I got that reputation. I don't think I'm not sure if I understand. I think it's because I kind of tell the raw truth without dressing it up in ways that people don't want to hear it. Maybe I don't have enough diplomacy or what, I don't have tact or whatever, but I don't. And the older I get, the less I have. And I don't think that we are at a place where we can do that, where we could play those kinds of games. If we're going to organize, which I agree with Brother Mario completely, that is the critical issue for us. If we're going to stop, I say if we're going to stop shucking and jiving and conniving and get serious about organizing, about, first of all, developing a coherent, deadly serious, committed leadership. And then everything else revolves around that. That's the way movements get built. That's the way they've always been built. As far as I know, I've studied a lot of movements, and every one I saw every movement I ever studied, whether you're talking about the women's movement, the modern civil rights movement, the 1800s civil rights movement, Black Power movement, I just keep naming them. Even countries that have had revolutions, Cuba, Russia, when you study how it happened, it always happens with a core group of people who are the leadership. And then everything is built around that. And so we can't even seem to get the core leadership. And so, I mean, I just don't know why we can't really unite, and work together. I don't know. I'd be interested. I didn't see the interview with Mikey and Diallo, but I'd be interested in knowing some of the things that they said, if you don't mind sharing. But our coalition, the Take It Down Planning Committee, Faith Community Alliance Coalition, seems to be really ostracized in this community. Many people, especially people in power, don't seem to want to deal with us. And again, I can only come back to all I can see is because they don't want to hear the truth that we're going to tell, and they know we're going to tell the truth, and it's going to offend some people in this community. It's going to offend power people. And let me be clear, because we all know it. White people in particular are going to be offended, especially when we begin to talk about racism. But we must talk about racism because it's at the center of all of this. And we must talk about it in clear, concise, factual terms. And there are just so many people in this community who don't want to hear that. And it's not white people exclusively, but there seems to be this reality by which if white people are offended, some of the Black leadership will run to their rescue, try to rescue them from having to deal with this. As I think I heard Mario saying it when I came on, we call it the tripartite beast: individual, institutional, and structural racism. So that's all I know, Shanika, except to say that we are our coalition. We are willing to work with anyone who is serious and committed about attempting to develop unity and deal with real goals, though, not abstraction. We're not going to work in abstraction. That's one of the questions that we'll always ask when we come to the table. What are the goals? What are we trying to achieve? Is it measurable? Is it concrete? Because we're not going to work in abstraction.
Now, what I think is happening, anyone who wants to jump in, there's too many people that want to be leaders. What I'm seeing in Rochester is that everybody wants to be a leader. Nobody wants to be a follower, but not everybody is capable of being a leader. You think about Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, and you think they were leaders, right? Everyone wants to play that role. Howard, how do you get people to be followers if they think they should be the leader?
I'm a student of history and an aspiring historian. If there's anything that we should have learned by now as it relates to organizing our people and building effective movements, is that the old model of one leader, a head person, that's over. That doesn't work. The powers that be, the oppressors, the people who rule things, the ruling class, have made it clear to us that we know how to stop that kind of movement. We just chop the head off, and then the body dies. And we've seen that over and over and over again. Again, our coalition, we believe in collective leadership. We believe in making decisions by consensus, talking issues out until we come to agreement about how we should move, and developing specific plans, strategies, and tactics to achieve goals. That's what we believe in. We believe in collective leadership. I don't want to be a part of anything, and I would advise you all not to, if there's going to be the leader. So that psychology is just so unbelievable in 2021. We need collective leadership, in my view. There's no argument about that, no debate, as far as I'm concerned, no discussion. There shouldn't be. So why people are still stuck in that mentality, I don't know. I don't get it.
So what advice would you give to people who say you are difficult to work with? What do you say? Well, I know you said you don't understand it, but.
Yeah, many of them, I would say, first of all, you need to try to work with me before you say that, because many of you are dealing with rumors. You've never tried to work with me. I would say most of the people in this community who say that, they've never attempted to work with me. Somebody else told them that. And those who have attempted and walked away from the table, if they are truthful, if they are honest, they would tell you that they walked away because we weren't willing to deal, and me in particular, I guess, because I do have a big mouth and I admit it, we weren't willing to deal in abstraction and to do things that didn't make sense. But our thing is we don't try to be know-it-alls. We're always open to discussion. But people will say they want to do certain things and we'll say, no, that doesn't seem to make sense. Let's talk about it some more. And I'm quick to say that. I'm not going to just do things because somebody comes up with another idea. I feel fortunate in the sense that I've studied. I studied for real under some of the master organizers in this community, the Minister Franklin Florence's, the Reverend Raymond Graves, the Dr. John Walkers, even Reverend Stewart. I have a history with Reverend Stewart that goes back years and years, even though we don't see eye to eye on many things today. Bill Johnson, I used to work for Bill Johnson. When I was a young educator and Bill Johnson was the director of Urban League, he hired me in one of their youth programs. I used to work for him, but I heard Mario saying this too when I came in. There are many people in this community who have had chance after chance after chance, opportunity after opportunity to show what they can produce. We know that they haven't produced much, even if they tried. Because if they had, we wouldn't be sitting here having this conversation. We wouldn't have the conditions that we have in our community. So why don't we let some others try? For me, right now, it's almost time for my generation, the so-called baby boomers, to sit down in the rocking chair. It's you all's time to lead, right? I mean, and not that we should go away. When you marry youth and wisdom, you really got something. When you marry youth and wisdom, you got something in terms of a movement. But we can't even seem to groom our youth because in the disrespect, both ways, from the elders to the youth and the youth to the elders seem to be, I've never seen it like this in my lifetime. There's always conflict between the elders and the youth. There's always conflict historically, but never this level of disrespect. So again, Shanique, I would say if you were delivering the message, you would say, Howard says some of you don't even know him, who talk about he's hard to work with. You just heard somebody say that, right? And others who have attempted, I like to hear you say why you couldn't work with them. What happened? What went wrong? And I'm willing to have that discussion with anybody who we've ever tried to work with. Let's come to the table and talk about why we couldn't work together. That's all I know to say. I don't know what else to say.
Barb, do you want to say anything? You've been quiet.
When I read Obama's book, when he first started to run for elections, the older people really did not want him. They thought he was too radical and too out of the box. But he was also a different generation. And so he, I think, maybe what we were talking about before, worked on his own parallel track, what he thought was going to work for his generation, for his experience. He didn't have a lot of political experience, but he had a lot of other experience. And then gradually there was a process where I think he respected the elders, who then in fact respected him. So I think it was a process. And my Halloween people are here again. So
okay. But I definitely think there is a disconnect between the elders and the younger generation. We see it time and time again. I think the protesting that has been happening, I know here in Rochester, we've been dealing with a lot of protests. Well, we were dealing with a lot of protests, not currently. So, because some people don't believe in protesting, or they do, but they want some type of end result. Like Howard, you always talk about not just protesting, but having a strategy after you're protesting. And I think that was a big disconnect from some of the protesters and Reverend Stewart, because he was vocal about that as well.
Oh, there's no doubt. I've been trained not to march unless you have a demand. You don't march without a demand. I mean, there are situations. Let me slow down. There are situations that sometimes demand immediate response, right? Something could be so crazy in the community that you need to respond to it right away. But usually, when you march in terms of organizing, there should be a demand connected to why you're out there in the streets, right? What are you out there for? Just visibility and symbolism? Or are you trying to extract something for the people, for the community? And it should be the latter, in my view, right? You march with a demand. And you see me post this thing on Facebook all the time. They want us to protest, but they don't want us to organize. So even there's a place for marching and demonstrating and all of that. There's a place for that. But it in and of itself is not a movement. And I think some of the youth have that confused. They believe that is the movement, to go into the streets and march and so forth. And that resistance is important. We never downplay it. But you heard me ask them all along the way, what are your demands? I remember, and I'll stop and let other people talk, but I remember Bill Johnson even said to the young people at the height of the protest, when they were being tear gassed and all of that stuff, he said, and he was speaking on behalf of the mayor, he said, come to the table. He invited them, come to the negotiating table, and let's talk about what kinds of things, your demands, right? They wouldn't go. They didn't go. For me, that was like a red flag, right? Because if you're an organizer, you kind of understand the importance of doing that. You protest, but you don't protest so hard that you don't negotiate, especially with people who really got, power and resources and so forth. You do want to negotiate with them. And that's not about kowtowing and giving in and, selling out. Not that. But you want to negotiate to try to extract something for the people. Otherwise, what are you doing? What are you out there doing? Just, is it just symbolic? So, and the division among our youth and elders, I'll say it again, is like I've never seen it. It's almost a natural conflict between youth and elders, right? Historically, you could see it. You could go study it in history. You'll see it every generation, but not like this. Not like this, where there's this widespread disrespect on both sides. Because some of us who call ourselves elders, we really do need to check ourselves. Sometimes we say the most disgusting things about our youth and so forth. And I'm like, whoa, wait a minute, where's our wisdom? Did we forget? But it's hard. I guess it's frustrating when you just want to teach, and try to give the benefit of what what you've experienced. And the youth sometimes just, they tell you ain't no good. You didn't do what you're supposed to do, or we wouldn't have to do this. This is this widespread belief system that I don't get that at all. I just don't get it. But I've heard it over and over again. You all didn't do what you were supposed to do, or we wouldn't even have to be out here. And many of us died. We really did die. Not make believe. We can construct a list of thousands who gave their lives for liberation of our people. And so that's another disconnect. Many of our young people don't seem to know that history, but they don't value it. They don't think it's important, but it is. It's very important. So I'll stop rambling, but